Welcome to this episode of the Federal's Worldly Wise. As usual, we decode some of the latest international developments. And this time, it's a no-brainer that we are looking at Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka, and India, the history go a long way. And then there's been a massive change internally in Sri Lanka. So it's replete with consequences. Um, so we need to understand really what's happening in Sri Lanka and what kind of repercussions it's going to have on the Tamils and on India. And the person absolutely apt to answer this or talk to us today is M.R. Narayan Swamy, who is who's been in touch with Sri Lanka for many years. He's covered Sri Lanka. He's been in Sri Lanka, and he's one of the experts on the Tamil Tiger movement. And he's kept in touch with the happenings in Sri Lanka even today, the way he used to earlier. MR, as we call him popularly, is on a special assignment with the Federal. So he's here. Thank you, MR, for joining us to explain what's happening in Sri Lanka.
Thank you,
So,
Dakshin. Thank you.
yeah. So what we'll do is, there has been a lot of, over the last few days since the results came, there has been a massive kind of a publicity in terms of there has been a allusion that Sri Lanka is undergoing a major change. It's almost bordering on some kind of a revolution, electoral revolution. All are these hyperbole, or do they actually reflect the situation on the ground?
Dakshin, what you said is very correct. There has been indeed a revolution in Sri Lanka, and you can call it a ballot box revolution. The JVP tried to bring about a revolution twice in the past with the use of weapons in 1971 and then in 1987, 88, 89. And both times they failed very miserably, lost lots of lives, and of course also took a lot of lives. But those were failures. But the same JVP has transformed itself, formed into a center left NPP, National People's Power. And thanks, I would say, to one man in Sri Lanka, the former President Gotabaya Rajapaksa, whose disastrous economic policies caused a complete breakdown. And that breakdown, complete breakdown, it led to a mass movement which the JVP, which is the core of the NPP, managed to capitalize on. And for a party to go from 3 MPs to 159 and from 3% of the popular vote to now more than 60%, if this is not revolution, then what is a revolution?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's a. I would say it's amazing. That what it. In some ways, it also shows the world that there can be a peaceful revolution. That can be a peaceful transition of power from one section to another. So even that's a great lesson for a world which is now racked with violence. But within Sri Lanka itself, what kind of a change do you expect? The top of the line changes, not everything, but some important changes you think will you expect.
One visible change there would be is the very face or the character of the Sri Lankan political landscape. Now, please remember, this is for the first time ever from 1948 when the Sri Lanka got independence, and we are not even taking the cutoff point as a time when in the 1970s the Tamil militancy rose. This is the first time there has been a Sri Lankan president who has got votes from Colombo, from the east, from the central, from the south, and from the north. Now, this is absolutely remarkable. So, we now have a president who truly represents, as far as the popular mandate goes, all communities, ethnic communities, and all religious groups. So, this itself is a change that has already taken place. On this, JVP, all said and done, is a cadre based party which has certain ideological framework. You may agree with it, you may disagree with it. In any case, the JVP has undergone several changes from the 1960s and the 1970s. And they now understand the world much better than what they used to, say, 10 years back or 20 years back. So you would have a crop of political leaders and MPs, ministers, who would not be what you call as a run-of-the-mill Sri Lankan politicians. Traditionally, politicians, the leaders, came from what you would call as a elitist class. There were a few exceptions, but dominantly these were the elitist class, the upper caste Sinhalese from mainly the urban areas. Now you have a crop which is completely new, which is not tainted, which is not considered corrupt, and which enjoys a lot of popularity on the street level. So there would be changes. There would be changes probably in the way economics is pursued in Sri Lanka, and there would be many more changes to see what really happens.
Coming to the question that really is of a lot of concern for Indians and particularly Tamils, the fascinating part of this election has been the voting for NPP by the electors or the voters in the north and in the east, which has been unprecedented. Can you kind of call it a referendum on the end of this struggle for Elam, or I mean, how do you see it?
I have no doubts in my mind, and I say this as a student of the LTT for about 4 decades, that the LTT, number one, did not represent the Tamil community, although it repeatedly claimed it did. The fact that the number of Tamils who have been killed, assassinated by the LTT runs into hundreds, if not thousands. So even from the time the LTT ended, when we talk to ex-LTT cadres or ordinary civilians, many of them would say something like, "Thank God it is over." Because a war which was being fought in their name, they really did not want it. At least lots of ordinary Tamil civilians did not want it. So, in a way, the referendum took place a long time back. But if you want to call it a formal referendum, yes, this is a very formal vote against the so called Tamil nationalist policies, which was being pursued by a section of the Tamil leadership without any let up, and also against the kind of thinking that was being injected into Sri Lankan Tamil areas by those sections of the Tamil diaspora which were pro LTT. In fact, just before the voting took place on November 14, word went around in Tamil areas from the Tamil diaspora that look, if you do want to vote, do vote for any Tamil politician, but for God's sake, don't vote for anyone who represents the Sinhalese. This was completely racism. And this racist appeal was rejected overwhelmingly by the Tamil community.
Okay, so no, we are also looking at the context in which, in the last 15 years, since the end of the civil war, the Tamils have, in some sense, been sequestered to the north and east. Many of them have lost property. Many are in jail as political prisoners. So there, the from the reports that come out, we see that they are undergoing a lot of difficulties from the time of the end of the civil war, and the Sinhalese government in Colombo has also, they also don't want any kind of a repeat of the past. So they have gone out of their way to push the Tamil minority or the Tamil community to a point where they can never again challenge the federal government or the unity of Sri Lanka. So, from that perspective, how do you see this vote? I mean, is it an acknowledgement that fine, we will go the peaceful way, get what we want, or how do you see it in this context?
See, it is not that the NPP or the JVP, whatever you call it, and unaware of the sentiments on the ground in the Tamil areas. For example, the president promised repeatedly in Tamil areas that all the land that was taken away in the Tamil areas by the military during the war, and which continued to remain in the control of the military, disappointment of the Tamil community, this will be returned. And the process has already started. It has started with now in one part of Jaffna and complaint, which I'm sure the president will address because in his interest to address this. Also, the president made an extraordinary promise during the campaigning that all political prisoners, now also equally important, political prisoners, he could have said, all the people from the LTT whom we have kept in prison will be released progressively. He didn't say. He went to, in other words, he was acknowledging that he made a promise that they would be released. Obviously, it will take some time in terms vis-a-vis the law and the judiciary, but that will be done. That apart, I think the major problem that the Tamils face, both in the north and the east and other parts of Sri Lanka, is the same problem, which in general are problem, which has got to do with the severe economic crisis that has gripped Sri Lanka from 2022. So that is the main problem, and for the president also, that would be the main headache. Economy, which is right now actually tottering.
Okay, so the other important thing is, of course, Sri Lanka's relationship with India. In the past, especially until the massive economic crisis which Sri Lanka encountered, the Sri Lankan government was seen to be tilting firmly towards China. And the manner in which the Indian government responded when Sri Lanka was in a crisis, it seemed to have worked in India's favor. So now that Anurag Dissanayaka has come to power, how do you think, being friendly with India, having a relationship with India is one thing. But do you think it will be to the exclusion of China, or will it be a tightrope walk that Sri Lanka will have to do?
The JVP, I'm using the word JVP because it lies at the core of the NPP. I
Yeah.
think they have realized, they have also, as I said, transformed themselves, and they have realized that the world has changed a lot. Yes, they were true, but that was a long time back. And as of today, they just cannot afford to antagonize any country, be it India or be it China. The fact remains is that the biggest debt that Sri Lanka now owes, they also on lease certain parts of Sri Lanka in exchange for the loans that Sri Lanka could not repay. They also have realized that India was the one country which gave a massive amount of economic assistance totaling $4 billion in the wake of the economic collapse. Now, this is actually much more than what the IMF has agreed to give as a bailout. And even the IMF loan is coming out in tranches. But India gave it away just like that. So they have realized, and if Sri Lanka has to rebuild its economy, it needs a solid cooperation from India. So there is this fair understanding that we are not going to get into this India out of it. And as far as India is concerned, it is our closest neighbor, and we need to go with India. I mean, that's realization I think is there in Sri Lanka, is there also in the JVP and the NPP, and that is one of the reasons.
Okay, so I think one of the test cases will be in the manner in which India and Sri Lanka negotiate this fishermen's issue. You have a lot of Indian fishermen, going into Sri Lankan waters and getting arrested and all that. Then you have Sri Lankan fishermen coming into Indian waters. So, how do you think? Do you think that this can be a test case to see how the government responds? I mean, both ways.
This is actually a serious issue. I demand the Indian government take certain decisive steps. The issue is all about Tamil Nadu fishermen not only fishing in Sri Lankan water, but using trawlers, which Sri Lanka says is so there is been this problem, and fishermen in Sri Lanka, be it the Sinanis, be it the Tamils, and also a section of Muslims, they are deeply affected, and it is probably one issue on which all these three communities are united. So, but fishermen, there is obviously a trawler lobby in Tamil Nadu which refuses to obey the law that you can't enter the Sri Lankan territorial waters anymore. The reason why this has happened for so long is because when the war was going on, there were no fishermen, and so the Indian had a will have to sit together and take steps so that this problem is at least controlled, if not totally resolved.
Thank you, MR. I think we've asked you questions that are pertinent to India largely, and as the days progress, and we get a sense of how the Dissanayaka government is performing. Maybe in a couple of months, maybe we should have one more discussion to see what he has actually done, his government has actually done, and what are the changes that have actually occurred in Sri Lanka.